I know.
Maybe.
Ah,
We did it.
we did it.
We did it. We did it. We did it.
Yay.
Rainbow socks.
Yeah,
Rainbow jersey.
yeah, it says daddy on it.
Yep. It's good.
I like it.
Rainbow shirt.
Yes.
Rainbow heart.
Yes.
What about your hat? Is your hat a rainbow hat?
It's non-binary.
It's just Oregon.
Huh?
It's Oregon. Oh, what's this? I didn't see that. Oh, got it.
It's the non-binary one. I have the lesbian one here. How did your breakout session go?
It's a topic for another time.
Oh.
How did yours go?
Really good.
Great.
Oh no.
It was too short and
Uh-huh.
hijacked.
Oh. I hate it when that
I like
happens.
the exact
The person.
person that it was directed towards. You know, like these are the people that we're going to be talking. Oh no, we're talking to them. But it was kind of good because it was like, well, now we get to role play this.
No. Mine was good. I did not have enough prepared.
Throw your dishes away. Come sit down.
God, is that you?
Was that ominous enough?
A little bit, yeah. Yes.
From anywhere in the world. He like leads everybody.
Oh my goodness.
These are our A students here.
Oh, cool. Yeah, that was pretty good. We had a lot of engagement.
A plus, A plus, A plus, A plus.
Where'd Michaela go?
It seems like it got sunny outside.
I know. Thank God.
It was
I
cloudy.
was going to be really sad if it wasn't sunny on my weekend.
I didn't bring a sweatshirt. I'm just glad I won't freeze to death.
Neither did I, because it was like 90 yesterday, and I said, I'm not suffering today.
It was 100 in Portland, and it was miserable.
Yeah, it was miserable here, and I was driving in a hot van all day for work. I know, it sucked.
Hi, welcome back. Did you remember I'm Maggie? Hi, everyone. Could we get? I know that he probably won't be able to hear us, but can we get a rousing round of applause for the ribs and the chicken, please?
Oh my goodness.
That's for you. That's the best chicken I've ever had.
So good.
It was so good. Hey, I'm Maggie. This is Elliot Seekins. My pronouns are she, her. If that's a new thing to you, sometimes we say what we like to be called. Because sometimes we don't want to be called by the things that people normally call us. Is that a good explanation? I'm bad at this. I'm she, her. This is Elliot. What are your pronouns, Elliot?
My pronouns are she and they.
How would you use that?
How
How would you prefer for that to be used?
I prefer they, but I'm happy with she,
Okay.
so I can use both.
And they is kind of a pronoun that is used for someone who identifies as non-binary,
Correct.
which means not female or male,
This is kind of, I don't know.
which is great. I am going to ask Elliot some questions about their involvement here at Mill Creek Community Church, and we're just going to hear a little bit of Elliot's story. We covered our names and
Yes.
pronouns.
Good job.
Nailing it. Elliot.
Yeah.
What tradition or religious affiliation did you grow up in?
Well, it was interesting because I grew up Baptist, kind of. My parents were divorced, so I went to a Baptist church with my mother sometimes, and then I went to a non-denominational church with my father sometimes. Now they're very Pentecostal.
Very Pentecostal. Super Pentecostal.
Very Pentecostal.
Okay.
It's a problem.
And how did you end up at Mill Creek Community Church?
Yeah, so I kind of went through it just trying to figure out where I am with my identity and God. And so I serve at a non-affirming church just up the road. I'm the youth leader over there, or one of them. And I decided I want to look for an affirming church to find more community and belonging. I hit up Google for affirming churches near me, and there were a lot of Lutherans and Methodists, and as much as they are a part of God's family, I was like, maybe a non-denominational or Reformed would be kind of cool. Found these guys, was like, there's nothing super on the website that says that they're affirming, but I have a good feeling.
Yet.
Yes, we're working on it. Started coming, and everybody was super, super chill, so.
What do you, we know how you identify in your gender identity.
Mhm.
How do you identify in your orientation?
I am lesbian.
Woo!
Yeah. My girlfriend's back there.
I wanted to just mention that I identify as queer, and maybe we could have a little brief conversation about the letters of the LGBTQIA plus rainbow. You covered L.
Yeah, L, probably also plus because non-binary.
And also G,
Yeah.
in a way.
Yeah, kind of.
Yeah, a
Use both words.
gay could be. Rob, you're so much better at this. I'm just going to talk about me and Elliot. We're just going to stick to us. I have identified as queer since I was a very young child, but didn't have the words for it. And now I have the words. My orientation is demisexual, which is probably new for some people. I am married to a man, a cisgender man, and I consider myself a cisgender woman. But I have always felt that my sexual attraction was related to a very strong emotional connection, and that if I didn't feel a very strong emotional connection to someone, there was no attraction. I mean, I can be friends with people, but romantic-wise. And so I have had intimate relationships with women and men, and then I married a man. He's the one. Anyway.
He's kind of cool.
He is cool. He's a drummer. What drew you to continue to stay at Mill Creek?
I think just the community and radical acceptance I've experienced since being here in both my identity and just, I went through a name change recently, and how quickly everybody kind of adjusted and got on there. And then, the acceptance of the girlfriend when I brought her for the first time, because she has church trauma just like I do. So we both feel very, very loved and that we belong here.
What do you think churches could do to create that kind of environment?
I don't think churches necessarily have to change their stance on everything, but if they could just learn to accept the people they disagree with, not just go, well, let's don't talk, or what was it? Don't ask, don't tell situation, because that's a problem too.
Yeah.
And just radically accept them, even though you don't agree, I think is something they could do. They don't have to change everything, just love people. Love people like Jesus better.
Good.
Yeah.
Okay. I'd like to welcome Clay back up to the microphone, the podium, if you would be so kind. Thank you again for coming. We're so happy to have you.
Good job.
Is it on now? All right. You got to do the other one, Ron. Yep. All right. There we go. So in the first one, I was trying to say, in my complicated way of saying it, that the Bible is asking us a question, and that the question the Bible is asking us is, what does a holy community look like? And that's essentially the discussion that we've been having today, in a certain sense. What does holy community look like? Instead of saying, we're going to go to Leviticus and say, we want our holy community to look like Leviticus, that's silly. That makes no sense. But to say, okay, what do these people in Leviticus do? I mean, they were trying to figure out in the context, probably in the context of the Roman, or in the context of the Babylonian Empire, in the context of a very different set of values that they weren't used to. How do we do Holy Communion? And so I ended with a little discussion about consent. And so I don't know if anybody knows who Kristen Rupp is. She wrote a story. By the way, she's a U of M grad. Go Blue. She wrote a story that got published in New Yorker in 2017. And as you can see, she's young. Get a story in New Yorker, you're doing well. And the story was about a young woman named Margot, who's about 20 years old, and she works in a movie theater in New York City. And she really feels disconnected, like she's not grounded anywhere very well. And she meets, kind of casually, she meets this somewhat, I have to say, Ruppenian portrays Robert, who's 34 years old, a little creepy. Wouldn't you say? He's a little creepy. But he wants to go out with her, and she says yes. And they go out, and they end up at Robert's house. Not because Margot wants to go to Robert's house, but just the way it ends up. And when they get into the house, eventually they have sex. And it's not because Margot wants to have sex with Robert. She finds him a bit disgusting. But she can't figure out how to say no. That story went viral. I don't know if you can read this, but maybe I can read it for you. This is a quote from Kristen Ruppenian. She was talking about the story. She says, when the story appeared online, young women began sharing the story among themselves, and they said it captured something that they had also experienced, the sense that there's no point at which it's too late to say no to a sexual encounter. There is a point at which it's too late to say no. They also talked more broadly about the phenomenon of unwanted sex that came not through the use of physical force, but because of a poison cocktail of emotions, cultural expectations, embarrassment, pride, self-consciousness, and fear. So, there is this cultural conversation in our culture these days about consent. The whole Me Too movement is about that. And so I started to look at, you'd think that the church would want to be part of this conversation, would want to be part of a conversation about consent, that consent would be somehow at the heart of the way we approach sexuality. That's a good thing. That's something the culture has helped us in. The culture has raised up the fact that consent is an important part of sexuality. So I did you can do that now. You can search a document for how many times a word appears. So I searched in that 175 pages how many times consent appears. It appears once in a brief reference to actresses in pornographic movies, twice in a couple of footnotes where the title of the article had consent in it, once in the phrase by common consent, once in reference to Jesus' comment on eunuchs in Matthew 19, and then once in an appendix on transgender surgery at the very end of the report. No discussion anywhere about consent. Now, 175 pages about human sexuality, trying to lay a foundational theology, biblical theology of human sexuality, and there is not anywhere in this report a discussion about consent. You see what I'm getting at here? What I'm getting at is that the church goes to study something, and they miss everything that's going on. They miss the good stuff that's going on in our culture as well as the bad stuff that's going on in our culture because they're not engaged in a conversation with the culture, with real people in real circumstances, So how to read the Bible. Some time ago, I started to develop this idea that the way that you read the Bible is conversationally. Now, there was a book, which I had already been thinking about this, but, well, let me back up and just do those slides a minute, because they're a good introduction. What is that when you got to the time of the Reformation, and books were now common, commoner than they had been before, cheaper because you could print them, and there was this idea of a certain way to read a book, and an idea what a book is. A book is, this is what we think of books. A book is written by a single author. It has a single point of view, and what you read it for is what the author is trying to tell you. That's kind of the model that I learned in school. So you think, and there's all kinds of theology around this, that you read the Bible for a single voice. The Bible always is speaking in the same voice everywhere. So in Leviticus, it's speaking with the same voice that's speaking in Romans or in, whatever. And we understand that there is some kind of progress across that. That our theology always has, in fact, that word accommodation is used. But what if the Bible isn't a single voice? What if the Bible is a conversation? And what if the Spirit speaks to us in the conversation? And so here's the book that I was going to refer to. Benjamin Summer teaches, I think this is right, he teaches at JTS, at Jewish Seminary in New York City. He's published a couple of really interesting books, one called God's Body, and this one, Revelation and Authority, Sinai in Jewish Scripture and Tradition. And what the book is about sort of got two levels. What it's about in terms of just kind of doing straight Bible reading is about what did God say from the mountain. So you know how it goes in Exodus. The people Israel are slaves in Egypt. They leave. They arrive at Sinai. That's about chapter 19 in Exodus. And when they arrive at Sinai, Moses goes up the mountain and speaks to God, and God says, gather the people, don't let them touch the mountain, because the mountain's going to smoke and so forth, and puts them in front of the mountain, and then God speaks. But now what the question that Summer, and not just Summer, but rabbis all the way through the tradition have asked is, what exactly did God say? And some traditions said, well, God just thundered. And it was Moses who wrote down the words. Some people said, oh, no, that's not right. God said, I am the Lord your God who brought you out of the land of Egypt, out of the house of bondage. And then God stopped speaking, and then the rest of the Ten Commandments, that's Moses. But he said, I am the Lord your God. And other people said, no, he said all of that. He said, I'm the Lord your God who brought you out of the land of Egypt, out of the house of bondage. You shall have no other gods before me. And all the way through the whole Ten Commandments, God spoke every word, which is in fact what Deuteronomy says. And Summer says, this is a discussion about hermeneutics. It's the way ancient people did discussions about hermeneutics. When God speaks to us, does God speak directly? Does God speak through Scripture? Moses, when Jesus talks about the Scripture, he talks about Moses and the prophets, right? Moses standing for those first 5 books. Does God speak through Scripture, sort of indirectly? Does God speak through the interpreters of the tradition, the priests? All of those things. And this is what Summer says, and what the Jewish tradition says is, they don't resolve it. It's not like there's one answer to this question. It's a discussion, it's a dialogue, it's a conversation. And in that conversation, we understand more deeply all the different ways that God speaks to us. Go to the early church. The church of, the first theologian that you get who really thinks about this deeply is a person named Irenaeus, who lived in Lyon, which is now France. They always said that the Bible, you have to read the Bible 2 different ways. And then you also have to read it theologically, spiritually. One of the words they used sometimes was theoria. And theoria doesn't mean theory, it means it means contemplation. You got to read it contemplatively. And so the Council of Constantinople, which is the council that produced the edition of the Nicene Creed that we use in churches now, was in many ways tremendously influenced by Gregory. I mean, he was there, and so this is the life of Moses. And what he does first is he just reads through the life of Moses, literarily, metaphorically, spiritually, whatever word you want to use here. And next step, and he does that in this story. So afterwards, we lost that way of reading the Scripture, which is literary, elusive, the way we would read great literature. And in the process, we lost the Scriptures. How do you read the Bible? You read it conversationally. And so this afternoon, when I was talking about those texts from Leviticus and 1 Corinthians and 1 Timothy, those texts are asking us a question. How do you form holy community? What does holy community look like in your era? In our era, in an era in which we have same-sex marriage, and we have conversations going on right in Exodus. Or there's a conversation between, say, Genesis and Isaiah. I could illustrate that if you wanted to. Or there's a conversation between Paul and James,